All right, welcome to our first cloud computing YouTube video. And at this point, you've probably read a few articles on cloud computing and things are becoming a little bit more clear. I'm going to expand on that as well as give you some examples. I've logged into our Amazon Web Services console and the Microsoft Azure portal so I can give you some concrete examples. And at some point in the future, you'll also log into these two consoles. So, cloud computing. Well, where is the cloud itself? That's always a big question. There's some confusion sometimes. Is it in thin air? Is it really up in the clouds? Where is it located? The cloud is simply whatever vendor you're using, it's their data centers. So if you're using AWS or Microsoft Azure, they have Canadian data centers in Montreal. They actually would likely have a couple of them, but we'll talk more about that later. But physically, you're using their data center, so you're using their server. And that brings us to the computing portion. Well, what does that mean? We're talking about CPU cycles or someone else's RAM, networking, possibly their storage, databases. It goes on, security services. We're using all of their hardware and software so that we don't actually have to run very much on our own computer at home. We can actually run a very simple setup at home or wherever we're located. Basically a browser is good enough to do a lot of these things. So the cloud is going to be in a region around the world, in a data center somewhere, physically, and we're using their services. That's what it's all about. So if I'll just pop over here to what you can see now. This is Microsoft Azure's portal, and you'll see that I have a virtual machine that I already built. It's a Windows 10 server. So physically, it's sitting in a data center that Microsoft owns, very likely, in this case, we can check later, but this is likely located in Montreal, where their data centers are for the Canadian region. And I turned on a Windows 10 server. When it's running, I'm paying a certain amount of money. Let me just jump into it here. So if I click here, it's got an IP address. I'll push start. I don't know if you can actually see this in the video. Yes, you can. So if I push start, that virtual machine is going to start. So physically, it's running in a data center. I'm using CPU. Over here, we've got the amount of CPU, so it's very small. It's got an IP address. We can connect to it eventually. And that's the idea. If we jump over to Amazon Web Services, they have something similar. You'll see that I have a Linux server and a Windows server. And if I want to start the Linux server, I simply right-click and push Start. And when it's running, I'm being charged a certain amount of money for the CPU, for the RAM, for all those physical things. And if I feel like it, I can, I won't do it right now, but you can see that I could stop it, I could terminate it. I have a lot of options here, and this is one great thing about cloud computing. So we'll come back to that in a second. Just want to show you, oops, sorry. I'm having trouble moving my PowerPoint here. So we have different options for all this cloud computing, all these cloud computing services. We have what's called on demand. We'll get into these things later, but we can run it for 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and be charged a few cents. Or we could run it for an hour, for up to a year, and well, even longer than a year, and it might cost us $10 or $15 a month, depending on the size of that virtual machine or that instance. And this is an amazing thing about cloud computing. But there you have it. These are physical servers, but we are remotely accessing them and remotely configuring them and doing whatever we might need to do. It's pretty amazing, actually. All right, I'm going to stop. I'm going to jump into the Linux server. It's still running, and the Microsoft. So it's got a public IP address now, which is awesome. So this is my Windows server. So I could, remote desktop into this, install some software, whatever I want to do, it's up to me. I have full control of this machine. But what we should understand is that with cloud computing, as we'll discuss later, Microsoft or Amazon Web Services or whoever your vendor is, they're generally taking care of the physical hardware. We don't need to worry about power. We don't need to actually physically, obviously, move RAM or anything like that. It's all done for us, which is an amazing thing. So if you think about it, if you just want to test something out for half an hour instead of you having to get your own server, get your own space, boom, you just go online and test that out, run that application. All right, we're going to stop here and we'll have another video for our next slide.